Hello, West Virginia family. We're missing you guys. We thought we'd make a couple of videos and read some stories to you that are favorites of ours. Um, I'm new to videotaping or recording, I guess. So pardon me for my inexperience. The first story I want to read is of Esther. It's one of my favorite Bible stories. And the beginning of it starts in Daniel 6 in the Bible. And then you can also find the rest of the story in the book of Esther. So I have a devotional book that my aunt gave to one of my brothers when he was little. So this story in this book is called A Jewish Girl Becomes Queen. King Ahasuerus, horrible name, sorry, king of all the Medes and Persians, planned a great feast in his palace. The palace was so large that when the king gave a feast and invited all the princes of the land, they came and stayed for days. Can you imagine a party that long? While the princes feasted in the king's palace, a special feast was held for the women in the palace of the queen, Queen Vashti. On the 7th day of the feast, when the king and his guest had been celebrating in the king's palace, Ahasuerus sent for Vashti. But the queen said no. She stayed with the women in her own rooms in the palace. King Ahasuerus was furious. He felt he had been put to shame in front of his princes because his wife would not obey him. He called together his wise men to tell him what to do. The wise men said that if the king did not do something, the wives of all the other princes would become disobedient. Make a law, they said, that Vashti is no longer queen and that someone else shall be queen instead. Then all the wives in this land will listen to their husbands. The king sent letters to all provinces commanding that the most beautiful girls be sent to the palace in Shushan so that he could choose his new queen. I'm going to show you a picture of how mad the king was. So in the town of Shushan, there was a Jew named Mordecai. He brought his niece Esther to the palace. Tell no one that you are Jewish, Mordecai warned her. Each day, Mordecai walked past the court of the women to ask about Esther. Each day, he and Esther waited to see whether she would be called to go before the king. Then the day came. Esther went to stand before the king. As soon as he saw her, he loved her. He put the crown on her head, and all the court bowed before Queen Esther. One day, Mordecai heard two men talking together. They were planning to murder the king. Mordecai sent a message to Esther to tell her what was happening, and she warned the king. Both of the men were put to death, and the whole story of how Mordecai saved the king's life was written in the book of history. Now, there's a second story, and this is about how Esther saves her people, and this is the one that's found in the book of Esther in the Bible. So Esther saves her people. King Ahasuerus made Haman in charge of all the princes in the kingdom. All the people in and around the palace bowed before Haman. But one man would not. That man was Mordecai, remember from the other story? As a Jew, he would not bow before anyone except God. Haman decided that Mordecai must be killed, and all the other Jews in the empire as well. He did not know that the queen was a Jew. Remember, she didn't tell anybody. Haman went to the king. He promised the king that if he was allowed to put all the Jews to death, it would cost the king nothing. Ahasuerus did not understand, but he trusted Haman. He gave permission to Haman to do what he wanted. Haman sent out a proclamation sealed with the king's seal that on the 13th day of the 12th month, all the Jews should be killed. When Mordecai heard this, he was terribly upset. He tore his clothes and put on sackcloth like a burlap bag and rubbed ashes on his face. The queen had not been told about Haman's proclamation, but her servants came to tell her about the way Mordecai was dressed. She sent clothes to him, but he would not have them. When the clothes were brought back, Esther asked a servant to find the reason for his sorrow. Mordecai sent the queen a copy of the order with this message: Go to the king, beg him to save our people." Even the queen was not allowed to go into the king's court unless he sent for her. Queen Esther was afraid to go to the king. She let Mordecai know about this, but he sent back a message to her, "Do not think you can be safe even in the king's palace. If you do not speak now, God will find someone else to save his people, but you and your people will die. Who knows, maybe you were sent to the kingdom for such a time as this." When she received this message, Esther sent to Mordecai and asked him to get together all the Jews in Shushan to pray for her for 3 days. On the 3rd day she would go to the king. The king might have her killed, but she would not be afraid. So this is what an artist drew of what they thought Esther looked like. Three days later, Queen Esther dressed in her most beautiful clothes and went to the king. When she stood in the doorway, she looked so beautiful that the king fell in love with her all over again. Esther smiled. "I wish to invite the king and Haman to a banquet." That was all she said. When the feast came to an end, Ahasuerus again asked Esther what she wished. She answered that on the next day he and Haman should come to another banquet. As Haman went out of the palace, he saw Mordecai. As usual, Mordecai did not bow to Haman. Haman's wife told Haman to have carpenters build a place to have Mordecai hanged. "Get the king to have Mordecai hanged," she said to Haman. That night, King Ahasuerus could not sleep. He sent for one of his servants to read to him the story of his reign. When the reader came to record of how Mordecai had saved his life, Ahasuerus realized that he had never rewarded Mordecai for what he had done. He sent for any of the princes who were in the court at the time. Haman was there waiting for a chance to talk to the king about hanging Mordecai. The king asked Haman a question. What should the king do for a man he wishes to honor? Haman was sure the king was speaking about him. "Let the royal robes be put on him. Let him be seated on the king's horse. Have the king's crown placed on his head. Proclaim to the people that this is the man the king wishes to honor," Haman told the king. Then Haman received a shock. The king told him to go and do all this to Mordecai the Jew. Proud Haman obeyed the king. Here's a picture of Haman's wife and Haman. Sadly, Haman went home to tell the news to his wife. While they were still talking, the king's messengers came to take him to the queen's banquet. When the feast was over, King Ahasuerus asked Esther to tell him her request. Then she said, "I am asking for my life. I am asking for the lives of my people. We have been sold, my people, and We have been sold, my people and I, to be killed." "Who dared to do this?" demanded the king. Esther pointed to Haman. Haman was terrified. The king was so angry that he walked into the garden. When he came back, one of the servants told him about the place Haman had built to hang Mordecai. "Hang Haman on it," the king ordered. Then the king gave orders to Mordecai. "Write this letter. Sign it with the king's name. Tell the Jews to rise up and fight against the people who attacked them on the 13th day of the 12th month. Instead of a day of death and sorrow for the Jews, it became a day of great rejoicing." We do miss you guys. We are thinking and praying for you, and we hope to see you soon. Love you. Bye.